Koto, Ko Antonio Bebeja-Ho. I'm the head of climate and nature at the SBC and Climate Leaders Coalition. Welcome to today's webinar on going to COP. Thank you all for joining us. We've had a few technical difficulties in the run-up to this, but hopefully it will be a very smooth webinar. We don't have heaps of people online today, although I think a few more than we expected. But the plan is to keep the webinar really relaxed and kind of use it as an informal opportunity for you guys to ask some of our guests some questions, and for us to kind of listen and hear and understand what your plans are for COP as well. So please, if you feel comfortable, turn your cameras on so we can see you, and use the chat function, and we might get you to unmute at some points and join the conversation. So I will run through roughly what the plan is for this, and then pass to Gillian. So we have a few different parts of today's webinar. The first part is Gillian, who is joined us from MFAT. Thank you very much. Will be taking us through some information from MFAT about what their plan is and how we can support them. And then we'll pass to a video that has been pre-recorded from Kate Wilson-Butler from Chapman Tripp, and also Craig Weiss, formerly of the New Zealand Green Investment Fund. And then we'll move into a section at the end, which is just kind of to understand your plans and to explain a little bit about what SBC is intending to do at COP. So Gillian, can I pass to you and also say thank you again for joining us, and just sort of take it away? Want to just unmute? Thank you.
There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Kia ora koutou. I'm Gillian Dempster. I'm the manager of the Climate Change Unit in the Climate Change Antarctic and Environment Division at MFAT. So I'm, well, we're all in a frantic busy period preparing for COP, which is this time in 3 weeks. A bunch of us will be in Dubai for pre-meetings. We've just had people get back from the pre-COP in Abu Dhabi, which was quite fascinating. Yeah, it's just a very frantic period at the best of times. This year we have the additional challenge of not quite yet knowing who might lead our delegation as the minister, and making sure that a new minister has everything that they need in order to have a successful COP, assuming that we do indeed have a minister by that stage and that they are willing to lead the delegation. So, I mean, that's much of the public sector is in the same boat. It's just a 3-yearly challenge that we tend to face. So that's meant that in terms of what our priorities and objectives for the meeting are going to be, that we can have only an indicative idea of what those might be, which are driven by the main issues that will be under discussion at this COP, from the negotiators' perspective, that is, because of course there is what Al Gore refers to as the cosmopolitan COP, which is the kind of everything else that happens at COP, which is what most of you will be deeply engaged in. So it's really exciting that we have this kind of expanded group of New Zealanders on the ground. We're sort of anticipating that there might be about 150 New Zealanders all up, but let's see. Anyway, so in terms of the negotiations and what the COP might come out with this year, the big ticket item, of course, is what's called the Global Stocktake, which is the first 5-yearly assessment of the Paris Agreement and its implementation. So there has been states were invited to submit their report cards. That's been produced into synthesis reports. It's also being held up against other keystone documents like the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which came out with its own synthesis report in March to support our discussions. That report, of course, it's no secret. It said that the world was not on track to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So we are hopeful that COP will be able to agree on both the urgency and scale of what needs to be quite a fundamental global course correction to get us on track. That's what we've been discussing in the pre-meetings, various regional meetings in the Pacific. It'll be discussed at Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting this week, for example, probably at APEC next week, and certainly at the pre-COP that took place in last week in Abu Dhabi. Also, big ticket items would be hopefully an agreement on a new global fund to support loss and damage arising from climate change impacts. That was agreed last year in principle, but the workings of it need to be delivered. There's been a separate committee working on that, the Transitional Committee. It just had its 5th meeting over the weekend and came up with a draft, which is kind of mostly consensus. So that bodes reasonably well. Plus, there is probably, well, there's a global goal on adaptation that hopefully will be agreed, a new work program on just transitions, and as always, a range of initiatives that are sponsored, some by the host country, some by groups of countries. Anyway, so there's an awful lot happening. How are we approaching the meeting? Well, as most of you know, we are running for the first time this year an opportunity to register an expression of interest for access to COP. Some of you might know that in the past, the only way that we could facilitate that access was as a non-official on the official delegation, which is governed by cabinet procedures that were set a long time ago. So we wanted to offer this year. Our existing minister was particularly keen on this. It's been very popular. We received, I think, something like 160 odd applications. We don't expect all those people will make it to COP, but it's good to at least have made that option available. So we are expecting a larger than normal contingent on the ground. We will be offering a daily stakeholder briefing, which you will find out about through the email that you have registered with us. That will cover a range of thematic topics. We tend to send out an email each morning where we outline what the topic will be for that day and who will be giving the presentation. That will be in the New Zealand delegation office between 2 and 2:30 every day. Outside of those times, it's unfortunately not a hangout space. It's a working space for the delegation. That's where we have our bilateral meetings. That's where we have meetings with stakeholders. That's where a whole range of business is conducted. And sometimes when people have been doing very long hours, they'll be grabbing a nap in the beanbag in the corner, but you might see a bit of that, but by and large that's not just a drop-in space. It will be a shared office space also with Pacific. We generally have abutting offices, and that won't be the exception. That will continue this year, and we're also with Australia co-sponsoring the Moana Blue Pacific Pavilion, which will have a range of side events and presentations talking about the Pacific's priorities in the climate change space. So that should be really fascinating. In terms of the program, obviously we'll be making recommendations to the minister about what they might get up to at COP. We have lots of ideas, but not a minister, so that's going to be a greater challenge than all to bring together, but we are very confident that he or she will have a very fulfilling range of engagements. I would encourage you, in terms of the security situation, we are, of course, keeping a very close eye on developments in the region. I spoke with our team in UAE last night, who are keeping in good touch with their counterparts. I would encourage everyone, as always when you travel, but particularly this time, to sign up for Safe Travel so that you will be getting the most up-to-date information as possible, so that if there is a consular incident or there is some kind of a security situation, that you will be getting, you will be contacted through that mechanism, and we'll be able to give you assistance. So my team in Abu Dhabi asked me to stress that in particular. There will be 80,000 people in addition to what's normally around at the COP, so it will be a very, very busy space, and you know, I think the UAE is host to you know, taking a very measured approach to the security arrangements. We do encourage people to read the travel advice for UAE. There's only so much we can do if you do breach local laws and customs. We do ask that everyone be sensible and of course take out comprehensive travel insurance. You should be, if you aren't aware of our divisional alerts, then do reach out to us. We have now set up a subscriber system so that when we are offering briefings, etc., that you can all get these, know that they're on. We will be offering a stakeholder webinar about COP28 the week before COP, exact date TBC. We will be asking those that are traveling to COP to stay on the line. Of course, everyone is welcome to attend that, not just those who are going, but it'll be of particular interest to those that are going. That's where we'll give the most up-to-date information on a whole range of things. Friendly reminders about you know, appropriate arrangements for your travel and insurance, but also just to give the most up-to-date information about who will be attending, what the priorities are, and any additional information that we are receiving. Right, so I'll stop there. Pretty rapid fire, but happy to take questions.
That was great, Gillian. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone, over to you guys for some questions. Do you want to please put them either in the chat or just throw your hand up and we'll have a look for them and call you out? Give you guys an awkward minute. Oh, here we go. Joe Kelly, you've asked any insight into what's considered a key lever for course correction?
Well, I mean, I think one of the key elements would be around fossil fuel phase out, and also the UAE's been pretty clear that it intends to push for like a tripling of renewable capacity around the world. So those will be some of the key elements. You know, there's been a lot of kind of debate about issues like, you know, how fast we can phase out, how far we can go, whether it's, you know, some countries are somewhat allergic to the concept of phase out of fossil fuels, but I think that, you know, it's pretty clear that we need to change, and we need to change faster. All of the scientific evidence is suggesting that we may not actually have until 2050, that we need to make more rapid cuts to emissions, and we need to make them, this is the critical decade. So I think there'll be a lot of discussion around that. There will also be, you know, discussion around, of course, financing, which, you know, is very important in terms of being able to assist developing countries to undertake these economic transformations that are required, and of course how to support the adaptation of countries that are really struggling and finding out, as New Zealand has had very tangible experience of, that adaptation is very expensive and can really hit your economy very hard. So those are the elements I think that would be most critical. And certainly, I think the UAE is really pushing for an uptick in renewable capacity, but also I think is somewhat more slowly, but getting there on fossil fuel phase out and urgent emissions reductions cuts.
Thanks, Gillian. Sorry, Antonia, do you mind if I just ask a follow-up question? It's Jo Kelly. Jo Kelly from the Centre for Sustainable Finance. Gillian, so I'm just wondering, where's the best place to find information about New Zealand's sort of approach to those external finance flows, especially in the Pacific, and any program of work or anything that MFAT is sort of working on in that regard that you think might be of interest in advance of this?
I'll have to get back to you on that, because I think that there's obviously a lot in our climate finance program, which is all publicly available at our MFAT website. There's some additional work that I'm aware of that is ongoing, particularly with Australia in the context of the 2+2 that took place for the first time last year, where climate and finance ministers got together. And so, subject to the views of the incoming government, I think the plan is that work should continue, and so there will be the opportunity to input views into that process, subject to ministerial views, of course. So yeah, but I'm happy to send you some information separately.
Thank you. I was specifically thinking of the Australian government's partnership with the private sector at the moment to look at blended finance, especially in South Pacific countries. And so anything that you have in that regard, just in terms of thinking or current approaches, that would be really useful.
Yeah. Great.
Sure. Did anyone else have a question? And if not, I've got a very practical one. There we go, from Andrew. A question around visas. Gillian, so if travellers are on a New Zealand or Australian passport, do they need a visa prior to arrival?
Yes. So normally travellers are visa free to the UAE from New Zealand and Australia, I believe. But there is a special visa for COP, and we do strongly recommend that you apply for visa. Otherwise, you could face issues at the border when they ask about your intention within the UAE. It should be linked in your when you get the registration confirmation from the UNFCCC. There should be a link to a visa. It can be, from personal experience, it can take a little bit of guesswork to get through the form, but we all got there in the end. So I do recommend persisting, but we do encourage people to seek out the appropriate visa for the conference, which the UAE has made clear will be required.
Thanks.
Gillian, I agree. It was an interesting form to fill out. Jess, I see your hand is up. Do you want to unmute?
Yes, hello. My name is Jess. I'm from Becca, and my apologies, I joined late, so you may have already covered this. But I just have two questions. The first one is, when will the green zone badges be sent out to our delegates?
So I'm not entirely sure about the green zone. The party overflow badge that we are giving access to covers the blue zone chiefly, and also the green zone. I don't think that this year there's a separate badge for the green zone, but I don't quote me on that. Last year there was a separate badge for the green zone, but I think that was the first time that there had been, that it wasn't just kind of a free access situation. So I don't know. If you haven't, I haven't received I think that most of the badges will be kind of just made available when you get there. I don't think that they'll be sent out per se. But if you've received the registration confirmation, then I do anticipate that things should go reasonably smoothly when you arrive in UAE and arrive at the conference venue.
Okay, thank you. And then that also leads into my other question. Are there going to be any other events out, like not including COP28, but an additional, like the NZTE New Zealand consulate events that anyone is aware of?
For New Zealand stakeholders, no, we don't tend to do those for a couple of reasons. The catering is diabolically expensive, so we didn't think it. I mean, using last year as an example, we thought about having a New Zealand stakeholder event because it would be nice to see everyone, but we thought $150 for a beer and a bowl of chips was actually way too much for the taxpayers to contemplate. So we scrubbed that. We do encourage everyone to actually connect amongst yourselves. We're not really able to facilitate that, but certainly. Of course, we can't speak for the minister, but I know that most ministers are quite interested to have a catch up with people that are on the ground there and find out what they're doing, but we're not planning any specific events outside of the New Zealand stakeholder briefings that we'll run every day.
Yeah. Gillian, can I jump in with my awkward question now, which is, in the absence of a newly appointed climate minister, what is the plan for having ministers attend?
If only we knew. We're kind of we're sort of optimistic that we will have a minister. We are. I keep saying to the team that we need to live in multiple parallel futures, so all those sorts of questions will be kind of decided case by case. In the case of the Pacific Island Forum leaders meeting this week, the discussion, the arrangement I think has just been announced, is that the caretaker Deputy Prime Minister plus Jerry Brownlee from the incoming government will be attending. There's an active discussion about APEC attendance next week, and then COP is even further out than that. So we are, as officials, eagerly awaiting this decision as well, for a variety of very practical reasons. So we'll know in advance of everyone else knowing, but as the runway gets shorter and shorter, then we're having to really slim down our own kind of planning approaches. So anyway, we don't know is the very short way of responding to that question.
I understand it must be really challenging for you guys, and thank you for answering it. Did anybody else have any questions possibly less awkward than mine?
I've got another one, Antonia, if I can have another one.
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Anybody else? I guess I'm just wondering, Gillian, potentially in the absence of a minister or with a minister who may not be well versed in matters related to climate and COP, from the government's perspective, what's the most useful messaging and points to carry forward from private sector attendees, sort of not on behalf of the country? I appreciate we have to separate ourselves from the official delegation, but just in terms of singing from the same song sheet and taking forward the message about New Zealand's sort of positioning, if not position.
Yeah. I mean, I think, obviously, I mean, I can't possibly speak on behalf of an incoming government, but climate change is one of those issues where there's broad bipartisan support. The National Party manifesto did recommit to the targets that New Zealand has undertaken. So I guess the key message is that we're still considering, we still are yet to know what changes in pathways might be considered, but that New Zealand remains committed to the goals of the Paris Agreement, and remains committed to the targets that has set in its NDC, that we are actively engaging in our own green transition and playing our part in global action, both in terms of reducing or limiting global warming, but also to support those countries, in particular for us in the Pacific, who face particular challenges. So that's, I think those are the broad brush consistent messages, and everything else, I think we just need to leave kind of policy space for an incoming government to be able to outline its priorities.
Gillian, I can see a question from Cal, and I see Kat's hand up, and then we'll try and let you go at that point and say thank you so much for your time. So Cal's put a question in the chat, which is along the same lines actually, which is says, for those of us not part of the government delegation, do you have any suggestions for how we can bring back learnings to maximise the benefit to New Zealand?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, this is why, Minister Shaw was very keen to make this option available, because he felt that, any successful transition requires a lot of stimulation, and so COP is a 16-ring circus, probably more rings. There is so much value to be gained there. It's a trade show, it's a convening forum. It's not, it's so much more than just the rule setting and the government sort of fighting with each other. It really, I think there is so much value in that broader cosmopolitan COP space, whether that's making the business connections that will be really important for us, finding out about different technologies, just talking to people about, how they've got around problems that they've faced in their countries that might be similar to New Zealand's or not similar to New Zealand's. But, so I think there is just, it's basically limited only by the energy that you have and being able to delve into that pool of learning, and bringing it back here, and the connections that you're going to make with other countries and with each other, much more solidly, I think are really really critical as we move into our next phase. So yeah, it's really exciting. We government officials only get to play in quite a small part of the pond, and so we'll be learning from you as to what you're experiencing. I'm looking forward to the post-COP debrief from those who've attended as to whether you found it valuable, what you learned there, what you found out, what you brought back, and what you did with it.
Wow, that's super inspirational. Kat, over to you for your question.
Kia ora. I'm conscious of time. It might be a question more for you, Antonia, but I'm wondering, given the the kind of proximity of business and the focus on business at this COP, and the unusual circumstances we find ourselves in terms of incoming ministers, is there likely to be any opportunity for CLC or some of the business delegates going to COP to engage with an incoming minister if the timing worked out? I mean, prior to COP, rather than at COP?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't think we were hoping to catch an incoming minister at COP and to see if we could facilitate some drinks or something whilst we're there. I'm similar to Gillian. I don't know how to guess when we might get a minister, and the timing on that. So it's not in our plan. No, is the straight answer, to try and catch the minister on behalf of with members prior to COP. But we are intending to see if we can organise some drinks while we're there.
Great, thank you. Secondly, and very kind of practically, are we able to share a list of SBC or CLC members who are attending? And is there any option to set up a WhatsApp or a way for us to keep in touch?
You are one step ahead of us. Yes, that is also
Sorry.
end part of, no, it's perfect. It's also part of the end part of today's agenda, which was to see if we can get willingness together for a WhatsApp group of businesses who would like to sort of be able to keep in touch with each other while we're out there. So yeah. And then in terms of whether or not we have a list, Rebecca and I, Rebecca's also on the call, who's the head of comms here at SBC, we have a list of who we know from people responding to our messages out to members saying, are you going? So we have that list, and we will have a think about whether we can share it given privacy stuff. Gillian, I know that COP publish a list of who's coming. Where are you guys at with in terms of, because you have issued the 150 badges, and we had talked previously about whether there's a way to share a list of who the New Zealand non-government not the delegation, but who are the businesses coming from New Zealand? How are we doing on that?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the Privacy Act does constrain us from being able to share that information because, the law requires us to only use the information for the purpose for which it's been submitted. So in that respect, we're not greatly able to share outside of government. So there will be a list of participants published. It will be a full list this year because in the past, the party overflow badges were not published on that list, but it tends to come out quite late in the piece, like once they that's one of the final documents of the conference usually. And there've been questions around transparency for some certain delegations that have brought large 1,000-member delegations from the petrochemical industry, for example. So that's why we're kind of going to this full transparency modality, but we can't really, unfortunately, as much as we would like to be making these connections, we're just not able to in terms of the Privacy Act requirements.
Understood. Thank you, Gillian, for that. Okay, Gillian, thank you so much for your time today. It has been incredibly helpful, I think, to help us understand kind of what MFAT's intentions are at COP and a little bit of information about how it's going to run and what we can expect. So thank you so much for giving us your time, and we look forward to that webinar in the week before COP. Do you know when we might expect some information about when that's going to happen?
We're working on it currently, so I'm hoping that we might have settled on a date by the end of this week, but I think the working date was sometime on the 20th, but anyway, watch this space.
Okay, got you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Gillian. Okay, so the next part of the call is we unfortunately Kate Wilson-Butler and Craig weren't able to be here with us today, but they pre-recorded a video as two people who have been to COP before about some practical tips and tricks about how to make it work or how to gain the most benefit from being there. So we're just going to play that, and then we will move into a short section at the end just of some practical things as Kat kind of jumped ahead to around what we're going to do while we're at COP and how to make it work in terms of WhatsApp groups and those kind of things. So I'm going to stop talking and cue a video.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Kate Wilson-Butler. I'm Director Climate Sustainability and ESG at Chapman Tripp, and in a former life was a climate finance negotiator with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So in that capacity, have attended COP.
Kia ora, Craig Weiss. I'm the former Chief Executive of New Zealand Green Investment Finance. And so in that capacity, I've attended a number of COPs as well.
And we're going to talk to you a little bit today about COP from a business person's perspective, about how to prepare yourself, how to plan, some of the nitty-gritty of detailed practical logistics. And Craig, I wondered if you could speak from your business person's perspective about what a COP is these days.
Yeah, so really the entire event is in many different locations, all focused on climate, of course, but it's a really big trade fair is the way I think about it. And you've got lots of different kinds of participants negotiators, sovereigns, NGOs, investors, companies themselves, activists, all coming together in this amazing environment where everyone is focused on what's going to happen with us and climate.
Thanks, Craig. I would agree. It's a big melting pot, and it's such a buzz. I mean, you've got these days upwards of 40,000 people potentially in the same place, descending on the same city, all trying to get around, it creates so much possibility for connection and
Really
cross-pollination. It also creates logistical headaches at times. So we'll get into that in a moment. But I thought we could unpack a little bit, Craig, about how you actually prepare yourself for this giant trade fair that you've talked about. What's the best way for a business person attending COP to actually think about preparing themselves? Are they planning meetings in advance? Are they reaching out, kind of emailing people to set up meetings, figuring out the schedule? How does it work? How have you organized it for yourself in the past?
I think it's a little bit different if you're a first-time attendee versus someone who already has a bunch of networks, and people who are attending. My first piece of advice would be just relax. It will work out. And it does seem a bit chaotic at first, and you've got to both manage and take advantage of that chaos. So one of the realities of COP is that given all the different organizations putting on events, etc., you're not probably going to know exactly what's going on, where and when, until you're there or just before you arrive. So doing a little bit of research before you go is helpful, because you will get an idea of, for example, maybe days that have themes and things that are important to you. But you won't get a view of what might be happening in a small little pavilion until you're there, right? And the beauty of it is that you have all this opportunity. The challenge is managing it. As I said before, one of the things that can often help is actually spending the first 24, 48 hours orienting yourself, going around and seeing what's on, and helping build, if you will, your agenda throughout the period.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I actually had the pleasure of briefing Craig ahead of his first ever COP, and I was trying to tell him that actually a lot of the detail doesn't come out until very last minute, and it's really hard to plan very far in advance, and he did not believe me.
No,
He's now converted. But I mean, I totally agree that a lot of the beauty of the COP is in the spontaneity, right? That's where some of the most incredible connections come from. And so having a bit of a plan, but then also being open to going with the flow that is COP is a really good piece of advice. So what is the best way to sort of plan and orient yourself once you're on the ground? How have you gone about doing that? I mean, advice that I might give is sort of maybe figure out who's released agendas and programs for their pavilion, maybe, at the airport as you're waiting to go, and then you can start to sketch out a bit of a plan. Or if there are particular organizations or individuals you want to get alongside, figure out where's their pavilion, are they speaking on a panel, and so you can kind of lurk around and sideline them. Any sort of practical tips like that for how to orient yourself when you're on the ground?
I think what you'll also find is that you're going to hear people talking about things and events they've been to or pavilions they've been to and what's coming up. It's generally a really open and sharing environment. I mean, it's kind of a lot of the community that's there is, their MO. And so just take advantage of that. I would also think about making sure you're on WhatsApp. That might go without saying these days, but that's a really easy way, of course, to get people going. It's well used globally as well. And when you're not necessarily in the blue zone, and you're outside of that at some of these other places, think about using their event apps, because what will happen is that when you register for those events, and some of them do require pre-registration, by the way, and this is one thing you can do ahead of time, usually not at cost, but sometimes at cost. And they are limited sometimes in capacity. So this is something else to think about. But when you are in those places, the event apps have, connectivity options. Say yes, and you'll find people asking you to meet if they think there's a common interest, and you can do the same. You can see who's attending and make sure you get those meetings.
Yeah. So you're talking about these COP adjacent events, like the investment COP, the innovation COP, that happen in the same place, but not within the COP venue.
Not necessarily in the same venue.
Yeah.
And that's part of the trick, is that you can spend so much time in the COP venue itself, and you could go there the entire time and never realize that there's 12, 20, 30 other venues, if you will.
Yeah.
Some of which are privately managed, not by the UN, just to be clear.
Yes. Good tip. All right. Should we talk a little about logistics?
we should. Could be a big part of your
Yeah,
experience.
it could be.
I guess I would expect this COP to be a little bit better managed than some previous ones, just because, you know, this is a venue that has done this before. No, it not quite this thing, but similar things. And logistics can play a big role because you may or may not be close to the venue. You know, security in and around COP is high, and that can be a big feature, particularly in the early days when everyone's trying to register.
A top tip we were talking about earlier is just being prepared to build in that time, as you say, for disruption, but also for the security screening at the beginning of the entry to the venue, and a way to really short circuit that is to arrive outside of peak hours, either quite early or a little bit later than the beginning of negotiations, and then you're not stuck in a giant line with all the negotiators trying to get in as well.
Good advice.
Yeah.
You can't get around it during registration, though. The first kind of 24, 48 hours, the registration desks themselves can be quite long when you get your credentials.
Speaking of long, what is
Right.
the key feature of a day at COP, Craig?
Oh, I thought I was going to ask you that. You've had really long days as a negotiator.
Yeah, and no, I mean, I have, and the negotiators who will be there absolutely do. But I think as a business person, you were saying earlier that you have a little more of a modicum of control over the length of your
You do.
day and how you manage your energy.
You do.
So how would you recommend?
The reality is
people?
your days can be as long as you want them to be. And so depending on how long you're over there at COP, you know, if you're only there for a few days versus you're there the whole 2 weeks. So, you know, you've got to take that tempo into account. But the reality is, you know, it can be long days. And if you're really out there making the most of it, they probably will be. Not just because you'll find a lot of things going, but because you'll start to note that there are social events and other things that you can attend and make more connections. Business people, look, we can do really long days, and we do, but the negotiators really are marathoners in this regard.
Yeah, we would often, as negotiators, look kind of wistfully at the business delegates because they would have all this time to kind of go off and have coffee and lunch. But I think some of the principles that the negotiators apply to their preparation is good advice as well for the business delegates, which is to say, just go prepared to have a long day and make the most of it. Little things like wear comfortable shoes, take a water bottle, but also, like you say, Craig, food supply can be unpredictable. So make sure that you're prepared to be relatively self-sufficient. So snacks, you know, whatever, gum, tissues, whatever that means for you, just so that you have what you need and you're not in a position where you're needing to go in and out of the venue, because it can sometimes be not possible to get out and back in during the day, and it'll cost you a lot of time as well.
Talk to us about what you think about the
Yeah.
negotiations and what some good ways to keep up with that would be. Because I always found that it was really helpful and actually kind of a cool feature of being there to understand and have a finger on the pulse.
It does pay to keep up with what's happening in the negotiations, because after all, that's why most people are there, and it'll often come up in conversation.
That is very
So being equipped to have a dialogue about
You wanna
it,
feel
even if
current.
it's at a high level, is really useful. And so there are a few ways, and you mentioned a couple, Craig. The MFAT Daily Stakeholder Briefing, which takes place in the morning, is a really good way to get the New Zealand delegation perspective. Climate Action Network, which is an international NGO collective, does a daily missive, including the infamous Fossil of the Day award, which gets awarded to a different country every day. And then also the International Institute for Sustainable Development keeps up with the negotiations, and they have a photographer on site. So it's always fun to just check their website every day to see if you made it into the photos. But more broadly, I think just getting a sense for what is important to keep it on top of in the negotiations, because every COP has a plethora of negotiating items, some of which will be less relevant to a business context and a business audience than others. And I think for this COP, if you're going to focus on one issue, I would stay across what's happening with the global stocktake, which is the main thing that's happening in this COP on the negotiating side and is new. So this is the 5-yearly check-in on progress under the Paris Agreement, where all of the information about how we're doing and how we're tracking towards the global goals is taken in. And then we figure out what we're going to do about what we've learned. And we've learned that we're not on track, unsurprisingly. And so all of that will go into what countries are going to do with their fresh NDCs, their nationally determined contributions next year. And so figuring out how the global community responds to what they've learned through the global stocktake, including this debate that's happening at the moment about how hard the world is ready to push on phasing out fossil fuels, which is a bit of a tension between some governments like the EU and business collectives like We Mean Business, who are pushing for language that goes for phase out of unabated fossil fuel development versus other interests, including potentially the interests of the host country. So I think that's one to watch, because that'll become a hot topic and right down to the wire, I think, at this COP.
It won't be boring.
It
for
won't be
anyone.
boring.
Fireworks, hopefully the best kind.
Yes, and take your earplugs and your sleeping mask for the plane home, because you'll need it.
Yeah. Any other last points? Or
I think that sums it up
best
from my
advice?
perspective,
Yeah.
Greg.
No.
So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, and enjoy.
Enjoy.
Okay, hopefully that was helpful. I certainly found it helpful. So yeah, there was some use to people. Okay, this final bit is just to run through some of the practicalities of how SBC is hoping to engage with everyone whilst we're at COP, and to actually put out a plea for some engagement from some members whilst we're there. So this will be slightly less practice, I think, than some of our previous bits of chat. But there's a few things I wanted to run through with everyone. First of which Kat has preempted, which is, if you would like to be part of the WhatsApp group that we're going to try and organize whilst we're out there, can you drop us your phone number through to an email address that we'll put in the chat, and I think we'll all send a follow-up email through. So we'll put that email address in the chat, and then we'll follow up with a follow-up email with all the instructions as well. So that would be good. David, I see your hand is up. A question?
Not a question, just a quick comment on WhatsApp in Dubai. It works fine for messaging. It's not allowed for voice. So unless they unleash it and let people use it during COP, just beware of it. You can't use WhatsApp for calls.
Okay, perfect, that's helpful. Text only. Good. Okay, then if it's okay, I will just share a very basic planning document that we're using just to try and call for some participation and to talk you through what we're intending. So if you give me 1 second, I will share my screen. Okay, so this just runs through the thematic program whilst we're at COP. As Julia mentioned, there's a daily stakeholder briefing, and then we, SBC, are holding a webinar slot on the 5th of November, and as part of that email, we'll be asking for expressions of interest for anybody that would like to participate in that webinar slot. The intention is to try and maximize the impact of having businesses there so that we're able to communicate back to New Zealand kind of what we're hearing whilst we're at COP. On the 6th, there's the NZTE networking reception that I think somebody has already mentioned. Hopefully everybody has the invitation. If not, let us know and we can forward it on to you. And then we are holding on the 8th of December, we would like to organise something to connect with the minister. I think Gillian kind of gave us a good indication of that is very tenuous. It depends on the minister's availability. We have had no confirmation from MFAT, just to be really clear, that that's going to be possible. But we will continue to try and offer that as an opportunity, both for members and others, and also for the minister. So that's just a kind of to flag that we are trying to coordinate something there to connect New Zealand businesses with the minister. But we aren't making any promises, and we will confirm as soon as we have any confirmation. Beyond that, we are trying to run an SBC daily vlog through the process. So that would be just an informal way to connect different members with the SBC and CLC network. So the idea would be either Mike or I will come and find one of you and just offer you the opportunity to kind of do a video blog back to New Zealand, just to kind of talk about any events that you've been to, any conversations that you've had with anyone that's been particularly interesting. So we would follow the thematic program for each day. So we'd be looking for a business that's got a particular connection with that thematic program and that's able to talk to something that they've found interesting that day. So we will also be asking people to volunteer themselves for those, or Mike and I will be chasing you around the venue with a camera to ask you to speak or catch you unsuspectingly. So I think that summarizes our intentions while we're there. We're really interested to know, and I've sort of highlighted Claire, although I'm not sure she knows that. We've highlighted Claire is doing 2 events as part of the Transport Day. So we're interested to know where members have signed up for things or where they're speaking at events, just so that we can make sure that we are able to highlight your participation as well through our channels. So if you're able to share that information with us, we would be really appreciative. I think that's it. Oh, Monica. Okay, cool. Thank you. So I'm just checking the chat at the same time. So I think that is it, unless Rebecca would like to remind me of anything that I've forgotten. Okay, cool. So we'll be coming out with an ask just for some volunteers for those bits and pieces of things that we're intending to do. Does anyone have any questions for me that I can help with in the last 7 minutes, or comments to each other as well?
Sorry if I missed it, but will this recording be shared as well, including that video piece? No, awesome.
Yeah, it will. Yeah.
Are there any sorry, sorry, I'm over talking someone.
Go ahead, Andrew.
So quick second question. In terms of like comms and things that we're looking to put out ourselves, are there any particular requirements that we need to be kind of keeping in mind, or we need to run things past MFAT, or sorry, I'm with Becca from that perspective. Yes.
I do believe that MFAT will address that in their briefing directly before COP, which Gillian referred to before. But one thing that she didn't mention in this session, but she has made clear to us, is that it's just really important when anyone's making any kind of statements or saying anything from COP, that they're not doing it in a way where it might seem that they're talking on behalf of New Zealand as a whole, as opposed to their business. So that's just the one thing that I would say to keep in mind. Certainly don't think that they will be expecting to sign off any comms, but I anticipate that she'll have some guidelines for you in that official stakeholder briefing.
No, awesome, thanks.
I had a chat before. Did somebody else have a question?
Yeah, it was Monica. So for these videos that you will want to share, does it has to be like on the day, or can you like pre-recorded? Because I mean, obviously we are doing a lot of kind of food, but the food, we are not going to be there on the food day, unfortunately. And so we are heading back home before.
That's a great question. I don't have a definite answer to you, and I'm looking at Rebecca across the table. I don't see why we wouldn't take a pre-record, but let us get back to you. Rebecca's nodding at me. So yeah, I think a pre-record is fine. Thank you.
Excellent. So we'll see you there. I'll send you the dates where we will be there.
Perfect, Monica. Great.
Do we know if Rod Oram has raised the funds to attend, and any ideas about other media from New Zealand who might be in attendance?
I'm going to pass to Rebecca as head of comms, the right person to answer this question.
Rod is definitely going, and he has secured the funds that he needs to go, so he will be there. He did actually ask, he wanted to be put in contact with any New Zealand businesses who were going to be on the ground, because he's keen to follow closely what New Zealanders are actually doing. So in our follow-up email, we'll note that as well. And if you are interested in us letting Rod know if you will be there, let us know and we can make that connection. I have been trying to scout around to see what other New Zealand media will be on the ground. I'm not aware of any as of yet, but we can definitely keep you posted on that front as well.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if any occur to you, please feel free to drop us an email, and we will send up some follow-up comms with some requests for volunteers and things. But yeah, thank you all for your time today and for your great questions. And we look forward to seeing some of you out there.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Yes.
Thank you for organising this. It's really
Yeah.
helpful.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll soon.
See you soon. Bye.